Yeah, we're live. We're starting a couple minutes early. What the heck? We always run a couple minutes late, so I thought I'd start a couple minutes early. And tonight we're going to talk about the OG LS1 because I have a video that I'm going to be posting. I thought I'd be able to get it up. Turbo Tony, you don't need to keep doing that. I thought that I would get it posted before I did this live, but unfortunately that did not happen. So what it is I did I've been listening to the guys from Australia, and they're always talking about the fact that I don't do tests on the LS1 on the 5.7 liter on that particular displacement. And despite the fact that we in America, that motor was used on very few applications. I mean, Camaro, Corvette, GTO and stuff. So it wasn't used very much. But and I relayed this, obviously, the sentiment in the video, because what GM made more than anything else, obviously, were trucks. And they made, compared to Camaro and Corvettes, that's like a one-day production for trucks that they made. They made millions and millions of trucks. And when I go to the wrecking yard, that's what we see. We see trucks and SUVs and vans and things like that. And that's where we get all of the wonderful 4853. And if I can find one, a 6.0 would obviously be awesome too. But when this all started, the first motor that I ever tested, or the first LS motor that I ever tested, was with my buddy Tom when he was at West Tech, and it was an LS1. It was a 5.7 liter. West Tech actually had two LS1 aluminum 5.7 liter LS1 crate motors that came from GM, and they'd been sitting there lounging for years, and nobody had ever run them. So I asked Tom, I said, look, can we get these things running? You're the fuel injection guy, you're the tuning guy. So I'm just trying to adjust my camera here a little bit. Can we get these things running? Let's do some testing with them. And he was able to make that work. And excuse me, we were able to get these things running. And from then it just started. So we started doing the things that I always do: camshafts and cylinder heads and intake manifolds. So the video that's coming up, we'll be testing 3 different things on the 5.7 liter LS1. We're going to test a cam swap, obviously. We're going to test a head swap, which is pretty cool, and also an intake swap, just to show you what happens when you change, the design of the intake and how that affects where we make power and stuff. But the cool thing, and especially for the guys in Australia, like Julius, what's going on, is that it will happen on a 5.7 liter all aluminum LS1 motor. So now the people can't say, and the funny thing is I've done endless testing on LS1s. In fact, those were the only LS motor test motors that I had back in the day until we started getting more stuff. So I did a lot of stuff. I ran Vortex on them. We ran all kinds of things on them. So, but I'm going to bring those out, and I'll post that after I get done with the live feed tonight, obviously. So we'll get that video up, and then everybody in Australia will be happy. So if you're in Australia, make sure to go out and walk outside and yell to everybody else that there'll be LS1 stuff, up on the channel, so that they can all join in and take a look and see how everybody's doing. So I'm excited about that. And then I'll have more because I've done obviously more LS1 testing. And the point to all of that is, when I talk about this at the end of the video, is that the LS1, even though it's a 5.7, responds the same way that a 4.8 and a 5.3 and the 5.7 and the 6.0, they all kind of respond the same way. Camshafts, definitely yes. Cylinder heads, yes, that works well. The intake manifolds, the same kind of things work. The 5.7 back in the day that we were running the early fast, the 78 millimeter, and then the 90 millimeter, or the 92 millimeter, and then later on the 102 millimeter stuff as that came out. But all of that is OG stuff. It was a big deal when we got an LS6. I was like, wow, that's like all the power in the world. And so the LS6 intake manifold, and they had a limited number of cams back then. We were testing them. I think Comp had 3. So we tested 3 different cams, and then they came out with more and more. And back then, my go-to cam, and I have this in one of the test motors, was the XR265, was the little cam. It was like a 212, 218. And mid 500 lift, kind of like a truck cam is now. But that was a good cam. It offered good power and good torque. It gained power everywhere. It wasn't gonna set the world on fire in terms of peak power, but I ran that thing. We ran that thing NA. We ran it with nitrous. We ran it with a blower. We ran it with all kinds of stuff. So it was it was the XE274 that I have for the 5 liter. It was that version, but for the LS back in the day. So let's see what you guys are doing. That's coming up. I've got also the the ECU and the harness arrived for the 4.2 liter, and I got on was talking on the phone today. You guys will know the guy who did the 4200 in both in the Studebaker and in the Fairmont, and went out and just like just knocked out a 9-second quarter mile with the turbo 4200 like it was nothing. I mean, went out as like the second or third pass. He went out, and it didn't take a great deal of power. It was a fairly lightweight Fairmont. It was a turbo 400. He had the turbo 6-cylinder, and not even making a ton of power. I'm thinking it was like 450 at the tire or something, and went out and went 980s at 134 or 5, I think. So that's impressive stuff. I got to talk to him a lot about. I had questions about things that we're doing when we're going to run this thing. And I'm going to be running at NA. And I watched a bunch of his videos. So if you guys haven't seen it, make sure that you go check it out. It's good stuff. And the thing that it's cool is that I like the fact that when he's on the dyno, he's trying a bunch of different things when he's on the chassis dyno. It's a little harder on the chassis dyno because a lot of times it's hard to get the converter to cooperate, and it's hard to get sometimes the kind of repeatability, and obviously working on it in the car is different than doing it on an engine dyno, which is why he's very excited about me running it on the engine dyno, so we can do lots and lots of work, and obviously he can hopefully benefit them. But he's got some fairly cool goals that he wants to do and run that, which will be awesome. And I told him I'm going to try some different runner lengths on the intake manifold. We probably will try some different turbo sizes. I'm happy to know, and he gave me this information, that the early Gen 3 stuff, the head studs will fit that motor. So it'll be interesting. There'll be some cool stuff. I'm excited about it because I'm excited about how much power that thing makes NA, and then start multiplying that out as to what it's going to do under boost. So I have some pretty high expectations, assuming that the whole thing cooperates. We're going to run, initially we'll run the thing NA. I'm going to try some headers and things like that. And then we'll run it under boost with a stock exhaust manifold and just a U-bend and stuff. And my buddy Jason at JT Fab's building a turbo header for it. I ordered the flange for that. We just need to make sure that the bell housing will bolt to the dyno. And now I just found out, and he told me that the dowels that line up the bell housing for a small block Chevy and for this 4.2 liter are in the same spot. So that means to locate the bell housing in the same spot. That'll make adapting to one easy. So adapting to one of the bell housings that we have very easy, which will be nice. So that'll be cool stuff. I'm real excited. I'm always excited about running new motors because, that's kind of the fun stuff. Yeah, Holly Hiram is very tall. That 6-cylinder is really tall. So what do we got going on? Besides Turbo Tony saying, yay, yay, yay. Scuba Stam. Julius, what's going on? John's in the house. Matt Mullen. Extrude Hone. I've done lots of Extrude Hone stuff. Richard Travis wants to know, can a 4.8 LS stroke with the a 5.3 crank in a 4.8 is just a 5.3. The only thing that's different is the crank stroke, and that stroke is shared by the 6.2 and the 6.0 also. So that's a standard one. If you want to build a 302 version of that motor, your best way to do that is, and I don't know if they're still making them, but one of Bryant or Kellogg, one of the crank companies, made a 3-inch stroker crank, not a 3-inch D stroker crank. They made those for back in the day for the Daytona prototypes. So if you took a 6-liter, a 4-inch bore, and put that 3-inch stroke crank in it, you could build a DZ302 out of an LS. Otherwise, it's going to have to be some other version of that. You could just do a bigger bore. You could take the 4.8 and make it a bigger bore, and it has more stroke, obviously, than the 3-inch stroke on the DZ302. But you could make kind of a version of that. What's the tallest intake for an LS? I got a big cow hood. If you have the high ram and then you have that sandwiched intercooler like the Shearer deal or one of those, and you're blowing into that, then that gets pretty tall. a four, and Sinister is right, a 4.8 stock. Well, a 4.8 stock doesn't outperform a DZ302. A DZ302 is about 355 horsepower or so. So it's a little more than a 4.8, but it's really close. A 4.8 with any kind of camshaft in it makes more than a DZ302. Jim wants to see a 3875 4-inch 4-125 bore comparison, all with the same cubic inch displacement. So you want to build 3 different motors just to compare bore size. If they're the same displacement and the same compression, the chances are the power output's going to be very, very similar. Travis, a 60s 302 cannot see 8,000 RPM, not in stock trim. One wants to know, have you run out of LS stuff to test? No, it's not. I got lots and lots of LS stuff that's different that I have never run before. You want to see a D-stroke 6-liter with a 4.8 crank? Take a look at the video that I have up already. We have an LS3 block with a 4.8 crank, so it's a 6.2 D-stroke with a 4.8 crank, and that's already up there. That's the 8,000 RPM thing that we did. The 302, I know people always talk the DZ302. It has this like mystique about it, and I love it. I think that they're awesome. If I had a 69 Z28, it would definitely have a DZ302 in it. But that stock motor with those stock valve springs and that stock camshaft is not an 8,000 RPM motor. Jesse, the LS1 responds the same way as everything else. It just put a cam in it, and that works really good. And then if you want more, you know, you could. An LS1 has the worst factory intake manifold. So any intake manifold is a big step up. Take a look at the intake video. You can see that's the baseline intake that we ran on the big intake shootout, because it's the lowest performing one. An LS6, a truck, a TBSS, a fast, all of those are quite a bit better than the factory LS1. And then the 241 or the earlier LS1 head, there's lots better cylinder heads for that also when you get to that point. Vans, we don't normally run the aluminum LS1, LS2, or LS3 motors, aluminum motors, much above 1,000 horsepower. LS7 block with a 4.8 crank. Yeah, you could do that. Although here's a little secret for you, Jay. If you run the LS7 block with the LS7 crank, it'll make a lot more power. Vinny, well, then why wouldn't we do a 427 versus a 427, a 427 small block versus a 427 big block? The advantage that the big block has there is that it has way better cylinder heads. We could put a lot more cylinder head on a 427 big block than we can on a 427 small block. That being said, there are some small block heads, some altered valve angle small block heads that flow, you know, 450 CFM. So there's some good stuff for the small blocks too, but they're not budget priced. Karen, a reader's ride thing would be cool. If I could get, if I would have to get people to send me information on their stuff. Yeah, Julius, I'm sure that that's somebody that I kicked off of the channel for whatever reason. And they probably vowed, I will do dislikes to Richard and until my dying day. De-stroking is not a bad idea. It's just that a lot of people want to de-stroke the motor so that it will RPM, and that's not what's stopping it from RPMing. It's valve train that's stopping it from running like 8,000 or 8,500. There's a lot of guys running stock stroke LS stuff to that RPM range. So if you're talking about 10 or 11,000, then we could talk about stroke length. But then you could start considering things like piston speed and stuff. But in this kind of range, I don't think it's a concern. Admiral, hey Richard, do you think a full trick flow top end is worth it on my non-PI 4.6? It comes with a trick flow street burner intake, a set of trick flow cylinder heads. I really like their top end packages. I've used them on the 5-liter stuff. I don't think I've done a whole top end package on the 4.6 2-valve stuff. I have run their heads and I have run their intake, and I'm thinking that we did those separately. But I've run their big block stuff and lots of different things in there, and they do a lot of dyno testing and research to make sure that those kits do what they say they do. That being said, it depends on how much power you want. You can get a fair amount of power out of a ported set of PI heads. So it depends on what your needs are. And if I was going to do a blower or a turbo motor on that, as much as I like the trick flow heads, I think I would just put ported PI heads on it. 9 Mile Washington's in the house. Crazy Mustang, twin turbo 61mm Helion kit. That should work good. What size can, Blue Collar Fox 91, what size turbo do you recommend for a small cammed, I'm sure cammed is what you're saying, and head 347 stroker? It depends on what power output you want. We always say the same thing, GT45 for 700 horsepower or so, and then S475, 7875 Gen 2 kind of thing for more than that. If that's a 347 and has a stock block, I'm thinking you're looking more on the smaller side for that. Why do LS motors knock when they're cold? Is that piston slap, maybe? Nicholas, sometimes getting them to run to 8,000 is hard. If you get into valve float, they won't run up there. Hypothetically, let's see, Blake. Yeah, Julius, I agree. The trick flow 2-valve is good stuff. I know the guy that helped design that. Hypothetically, if a guy was to run a single 62 turbo on a 4.8 and a 6.0, would it make more horsepower on the 4.8? Are we doing a totally different deal with a max out spec turbo and might try to de-stroke? Blake, yes, it will make more power on a 4.8 only if the hot side, if you run into the flow restriction on the hot side before you run into it on the cold side. So I don't know what cold side that, or I don't know what hot side that is, but you're going to have a lot more back pressure on the 6.0. So you might not be able to take advantage of everything that the compressor has to offer because you run into a choke point on the hot side first. Whereas on a 4.8 or a 4.0 or a 3.0 or a 2.4 Honda, you might be able to max that thing out. The other thing is if you could look at the compressor map, you could have a better idea because you could find out you're going to have to change the pressure ratio on the smaller motor. Maybe you're in a more favorable position on the map in that higher pressure ratio. The map would tell you whether or not that's true. Rocky, is it really detrimental running a high ram on an NA motor? Like I said, I just want to, no, it's not detrimental. The high ram is not a boosted, it's not a turbo or a blower manifold. There's really no such thing as that. The high ram is a shorter runner, tunnel ram style manifold that wants to make power at a higher engine speed than a fast or a Trailblazer SS or a stock truck manifold. So it will do that whether you have boost on it or not. So the shape of the power curve is going to be determined by that manifold design. And then when you add boost to that, you just add boost to that. Jay, like I said, we don't run the LS1 aluminum block much above 1,000. I think things start moving around there. It doesn't have very thick sleeves on it. The cap seems to start moving around. I just don't think it's the right application for running 4-digit power stuff. We do that on the iron blocks. My 13B idles at 8,000 RPM. Rotary guys chiming in. Trenton, how do we cure what? I do have an update on the inline 6-cylinders. We talked about the 4200, which that's going to go on. The 292 Chevy is still being put back together. That should be done hopefully when I get it back, and I can start doing some testing on that as well. My LM4 is a baby LS1. How much compression can you get from flat tops in a 5.3? Well, you're going to add about 1 point compared to the factory 5.3 piston, the dish piston that's in it. You can also mill the head and get it higher than that. But then you also have to remember you're going to take away piston to valve clearance when you do that. That limits camshaft. So even though you came up with compression, you're going to have to go down in camshaft. Paula, we have run a Crossboss 302 manifold on at West Tech. The guy there, one of the customers ran one there, and it worked very, very well. It made a lot of power. I don't know about the LM4 block. I'm not as familiar about that. The Crossboss worked very, very well. If you're talking about the one for the Boss 302, that it worked very well, made good power. This was the single inline Autolite carburetor. I've seen some that run 2 of them, but we've never run one of those. Young, what do I need to spin an LM453 to 7,000 or 7,500? You need nothing. You just need a camshaft and valve springs, and it will go to 7,500. If you want to make power up there, you need to have a short runner intake, like the High Ram will do that. The ProFlow that I tested in the 5.7 in the video that I'm posting tonight, that will easily do that. Revving it out there is not a problem. Let me catch back up here. Let's see what's going on. Sean, S14. You got to hit me with those questions, man. Tim, the LM4 is an aluminum 5.3, but is it an aluminum 5.3 like the L33 is, or the LC9? Is it that kind of aluminum 5.3? If so, that's a really good one. I just don't know anything about the LM4. Vinny, is it true that a turbo, the AFR02 sensor is hard to get accurate reading because of the pressure on the hot side, and after the turbo, it's not as accurate? I certainly hope not. We always run it afterwards. We don't run it before because of the heat, and we don't want to damage the O2 sensor. But afterwards, as long as everything is sealed, you're still getting an accurate reading on the air fuel. Yes, a single plane intake will also do that. A Super Victor or the Holly and the Edelbrock Victor Jr. style. They don't make as much power, but you can use those. Jeremy, anything that's labeled stage 1 or even stage 2 on a 6-liter, whether it's a stage 1 or stage 2 turbo cam, a stage 1 or 2 NA cam, a stage 1 or 2 blower cam, or any of those, I would stay away from a positive displacement blower because those tend to take away a bunch of low and mid-range power. But and any stage 1 or stage 2 NA cam, something in the, let's say, 218 to 224 degrees of intake duration on there would be easy. If you want to go a little bit bigger, something like that comp 54-454-11 cam, where it's a 227 243 cam, that will make really good power under boost. Yeah, the LM4 is the transverse mounted motor. I just didn't know what the structure was of that particular block. I just haven't seen anybody run one of those. Oh, the LS4, that's right. It's Hill Customs is right. The LS4 is the one in the Grand Prix and the Monte Carlo and stuff. Brian, in a 6-liter, if that's what you're talking about, a 211 duration is fine. It's going to be on the small side, but if you're trying to do a driver, that's a good place to look at. You could go a little bigger than that. But with a, if you had like a 211, 218, or 220 cam, and you had a 1,000 horsepower turbo on a 6-liter, you could make 1,000 horsepower with that camshaft. Do I need to worry if I put a supercharger on a stage 2 NA cam? No, it's actually going to work really, really well. Dale, I have not done anything. I haven't sold the LY6 Big Bang motor yet, but I'm going to. We know the 5.3 aluminum blocks like the L33 and the LC9 have thicker sleeves, and you can make 1,000,000 horsepower with those. I just don't know about that the LM4 version. Yeah, the cranks are different on the transverse motors because they want to package the accessories up closer. $231, $242, $612, $615, $117 plus 3. That's going to be a positive displacement blower cam with that wide of an LSA. Okay, for a PD blower, yeah, that's fine. I myself wouldn't run something that wide on a 117. That's going to help it make power at the top, but it's going to be soft down low. In my opinion, people spend 90% of their time going up to the maximum RPM and not at the maximum RPM, where that 117 is going to be most helpful. You're going to be able to add power. But if the blower already has enough, if it's something you already have more torque than you can deal with, then that will work just fine. Richard, what is the weight difference between an LS60 and an LT1? I don't know what an LS60 is. Are you talking about an LS6? That guy, take a look at the, somebody tell me the name of the guys that are doing the L1 stuff with the twin turbos on them. They're doing crazy stuff with I don't know about the stock bottom end. They're not using stock bottom end stuff. I don't know about the stock pistons and rods, but the block and seems to handle quite a bit. The VW makes interesting motors. Great Lakes, that's an oversimplification. They make complex motors. I've dealt with the guys from VW and the engineers and stuff, and man, they over-engineer a lot of stuff. Nitrous isn't inherently more dangerous. You can't get the same power gains with nitrous that you can with boost, but you can get good gains with it. And I've gone through 20. I probably went through 25 or 30 bottles with my 5-liter Mustang when it was stock. So as long as it's right, it's right, and it makes lots of power. And I've run it on road courses, on oval courses, out on the street, everywhere, and it works really well. Maurice, what is an ALS7? So, Richard, what heads cam intake setup would you use for a stock bottom end 6-liter Mac? What is it? Is it max effort? The max effort is going to be dictated by the available camshaft, by the available piston to valve clearance. You know, if you put a bigger head on it, that's going to make things even worse unless you get something that has a different valve drop than the factory head does. Maybe the TFS stuff might help with piston to valve clearance. But if not, you're going to be looking at a 230-ish intake cam, and then something you can go out as big as a 248 or so on the exhaust. That's going to limit your power. If you want to make lots of peak power, then you put a decent head on it and a single plane intake and just rev it out really far. But if you want to make power throughout the curve, then a fast intake or something like that probably works better. An LS7, I don't know about the LS7. I don't know about that block. I think 308 speed. I think back in the day, I think we ran some of these crate motors to somewhere in the 700 to 750 horsepower flywheel range. With the only thing I ever did was we ran Vortex on them. Great Lakes, my dog will be does snore in the background. He's not right now, but he has been in other videos though. That guy, Turbo LT1, would make a lot more power than a nitrous LT1. Is the C8 still a Corvette? It is. They just change it every year. It looks different. Turbo Tony steps up. What's going on? I bought the Summit 8711. Did a video on the 234, 247, 113. That was a good cam. Dual spring kit. What kind of push rod should I use? I never use 3/8 push rods on anything. None of the LS motors I've ever put together uses. I always use a 5/16 push rod. If you're worried about deflection, and I've done tests on deflection with 5/16 push rods, and we've done, you know, stock push rods and 80 wall push rods and 120 wall push rods, and they didn't change the power at all. So that tells me there's not really deflection. The nice thing about the LS is it has fairly lightweight valve train, and it doesn't have a lot of spring rate. If you were talking about having a solid lifter camshaft and you had 500 pounds of seat pressure and 1,000 pounds of open pressure where you're going to have deflection in the push rod, then I'd say, yeah, that's probably a concern. But I never run a 3/8 push rod. Maybe some of the race guys do, and maybe if you're running lots and lots of RPM, more than 8,000, even on the 8,000 RPM motor, I didn't put 3/8 push rods in it. We use 5/16. But thank you for the support. I've never tested any PRC as cast stuff. I've tested some of their ported stuff. Yeah, I do have plans, more plans for the Nova. The 4.8 liter intake is very good for boost, and you can run as much as you want. Yeah, the 625 lift isn't really a concern. It would be more the valve spring pressure for the factory push rod, and I think actually the factory push rod works fairly well. Jody, I would put ring gap in it, especially on that. We just took apart one of the LS3s and it had 13 thousandths ring gap, and that's not enough for boost, even though we did run boost on it. Ramon, I wouldn't do anything. If you're going to take it apart and put that top end on there, it works very well. If you're going to think about boost later on, maybe add a little ring gap while you have the thing apart. Victor, the limiting factor for high RPM on an LS is the valve train. You need to get the harmonics right in the valve train. The spring, not just the spring rate, but the spring frequency and the cam lobe intensity all need to be matched to get the thing to want to run at that RPM. And it's not difficult. There are guys doing it. So you just need to talk to your cam guys, talk to the guys at Comp. They'll tell you how to do it. Talk to the guys at BTR, Texas Speed. All those guys should have enough experience now to make that work. Young, I always ask this, but Super Chat doesn't work for me. You could always do PayPal. but actually, I'm not concerned about that. I think a 700 R4 will bolt up to an LT1. That has the same bell housing pattern as a small block Chevy. Travis, both of those motors work very well, an LQ4 or an LQ9. If you're in a position where you get to choose between those two, that's a good position to be in. The 6.0 and supercharger way back with the twin torque storms, which I want to run again, was a feed, a fuel flow feed from the carbureted pumps from the dyno. Are there any pros to running 11/32 or 3/8 push rods? Yeah, if you have lots and lots of spring pressure and you run lots and lots of RPM and you're worried about deflection. But remember, you have to make those fit in the head, and those won't fit in the stock heads usually, or even some of the aftermarket heads. Maximum daily boost on a stock 4.8, 7.4 pounds. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I've run the iron head gun nuts once enough. I've tested the iron LS heads. I've never run those heads that I remember. I thought that we ran Chad's motor, which I did the first 6-liter Big Bang, the Gen 3 Big Bang with, and I thought that we ran it on the dyno stock before we took it apart because I wanted to make sure that the motor was okay. So maybe I've run iron heads, but it was just a stock motor, just the stock 6-liter. Jung, I'm going to put my email address here, which and that should lead you to PayPal if you want to do something. And again, I appreciate it. Yeah, if it does it NA, it will do it boosted. Although I get a lot of, and this, I'm glad you brought that up. And I got one of these comments today. Somebody asked me, they said that they have I think a 396 11-to-1 big cam, you know, all big block Chevy kind of thing, and they want to know if they can add boost to it. And I said, yes, you can add boost to any motor; it will work. But then they want to know how much boost. I'm like, this isn't a turbo. This isn't a turbo motor that you've built that's going to be a turbo motor. It's a motor that you built that you just want to try to add boost to. So if you add a little bit of boost to it, it will probably work fine. But since it wasn't designed for that, not that a stock LS motor is designed for that either, but it's not an 11-to-1 with a dome piston and a cam that probably has 108 or 110 degree lobe separation angle. So it's not going to be ideal, but I think honestly it would still work. I just don't think I would try to max out something like that. What's the best static timing for a 4L60? I don't know that the transmission really cares about timing. When we run timing at wide open throttle on a 5.3 or most LSs, it's about 29 degrees at the top. It's less down low, maybe as little as 10 or 12 at the bottom, especially under boost. And then it kind of ramps in. There's less than at the torque peak. Although we've run a lot of these, especially NA motors, because we're running them cold and running them on 91 octane, where we just have 29 degrees everywhere from 3000 all the way up to 6500. And it still works well. It just doesn't need that much timing down low. Are you going to LS swap the Fox body? I don't know. That my 88 original owner, 5-liter Mustang, doesn't have a motor in it right now, so it needs something. Oh, the weight difference between an LT1 and a 6-liter LS. I don't know. Does anybody have weights on any of these motors? I think an LT1, since although it is an iron intake manifold, so it might be a little heavier with a composite intake on an LS. It's going to be way more than an aluminum LS, but an iron LS might be kind of comparable. They both have aluminum heads. Mr. Dash, and you're worried about piston slap. Is this a real high mileage motor? If it's excessive, it's not good. But if it, you know, we run stuff that has 200,000 or 300,000 miles on it with boost all the time. 4.6 2-valve Big Bang. Yes, that would be good. Brian, we don't know yet. I think the 6-liter with that STS Cadillac blower, I think is belt slippage. So we're going to find out. I'll get back on the dyno with it. All right, Mike, enjoy. 4,200 in the Fox body. Have you seen how big those things are? They're like gigantic, like long and gigantic tall. I was afraid it would just tip the Mustang over. Although it did fit in the Fairmont, so if it fits in a Fairmont, it will definitely fit in a Mustang. Vinny, yeah, you can change the static pressure, which is, we talked about this last night in the live feed, which is why you boost reference the regulator so that you have the same delta pressure across the injector. So if your injector is rated at 58 PSI and you have 10 pounds of 10 pounds of boost pressure on the other side of your injector, now you're only running 48 pounds of fuel pressure. And if you're running 50 pounds of fuel pressure and 50 pounds of boost, your injector will not flow. So you have to have more fuel pressure than you have boost pressure, obviously. And ideally, you want to keep it at the same amount. So if you're starting out with 58 static, you boost reference the regulator, so it will go up at a 1-to-1 rate with boost. So if you have 10 pounds, now all of a sudden you have 68 pounds of fuel pressure feeding that injector against the 10 pounds of pressure, which gives us the delta of 58. I don't know why the E85 would be improved gas mileage, just because you should use a lot more of that fuel. It will definitely probably make more power. It can, especially if you're running into the knock sensor and you're running into detonation. A 2JZ would be good. I kind of want to see where this 4200 is going to go. I don't think it has. Does anybody know what the flow rate is of a 2J head? Like what a stock one flows? And maybe what a ported one flows. I've never seen any values on that to know. I kind of know what the 4200 does, and if the information is correct, I'm told that guys that are running these in what the heck classes, stock eliminator classes, these 4200s and stock eliminator classes are running over 10,000 RPM. And in NA trim, they're supposed to be making like 600 or 650 horsepower, something like that, which seems like quite a bit. Remote handheld tunes. Jesse, you can use the pack springs, or you can use a dual spring. You can use a 20, what is it? 26918 from Comp. Although I like to have a dual spring just in case one breaks, and then you always have the other one that's definitely going to hold the valve up and not get it smacked. But you don't need to overspring it. That's also a concern. Google says 300 CFM on a 2JZ head. Is that a stock one, or that's got to be a ported one? There's no way that the factory head flows 300 CFM, I wouldn't think, although some of the Honda stuff does. I know I do have the RB25. I'm very excited about that. So the GT head flows better than the GTE head. Okay. But does anybody, Google says the 2JZ head flow is 280 CFM. Would you want to test my ported EQ heads, 219, 229, cam 17 rocker from Magnum 57? It's all new, sitting in a shop in India. You have to supply the motor as I'm in Australia. Brian, I might take you up on that. Send me, I put my email address, send me an email, because I've seen those EQ heads and I've read about them, and I think that that's probably a good option. I think that guys probably would go to that and run that on a Magnum. Yeah, Tim, I don't think 300 is probably a real number on an unported one. I know that these 4200 heads will go over 300. As a matter of fact, I'm told they'll get close to 350 once they're ported properly. But I haven't seen that, so I don't know that that's true. Tokyo Drift with the Fox body. 5.3 liter LS, best cam with stock heads. Go if you're going to do an NA thing, look at the videos, because all that information's up there where I tested all the stock cams. If you want to run a stock cam, I tested lots of aftermarket cams. Just tell me how much power you want to make and how high you want to rev it. You can go anywhere from a stock 5.3 cam, which will make 355 horsepower, all the way up to a 227 or a 231 cam, which will make maybe 100 more than that. Travis, lowest, thank you very much. Lowest oil pressure you'd feel comfortable with in an LQ4. I'm hovering around 20 around hot idle. I've seen guys do that. And what I was looking for when I did the low oil pressure video in my truck is I just saw a big change. So I wasn't so much interested in the number as I was. I mean, if the motor's driving around and lasts and runs every day and has run that way for 2 or 3 or 5 years, then you go, okay, this is normal, whatever that normal is. You might think about putting, Travis, what I did is put a mechanical gauge on it, and you can do that, put a mechanical gauge on it and make sure that that number is accurate. And then 20 would be lower than I would want at a hot idle. I'd like to see 40, but I don't know how low your idling is. You're idling down at like 600 RPM. And yeah, that's a good point too. Travis, try changing the oil and see what happens. Yeah, I don't really care about check engine lights, Austin. The oil light would be a lot scarier. And I see that. I've seen that on my truck several times. Yeah, that's what Google would tell me. You can't afford a 2J, so just don't worry about it. Yeah, see, Victor's saying that he's run it at 15 psi and he's not no problems. Like I said, if it works, it works, and I'd like to see it higher than that. But if it works and it keeps driving, that's fine. Vinny, yes, if you use a throttle body with injectors in it, you can get in a carbureted intake manifold, you can get charge cooling like a carburetor does. I don't think it's exactly the same, but it should be very close. All right, the man with the plan's out. $233,000 miles. That's good miles. Okay, so the interesting thing is that if that head flows less than the 2J head flows less than a 4200 head, and the 2JZ is smaller than a 4200, so it has less head flow and has less displacement, wouldn't you think that this thing could make, I don't know how strong the block is on these things. I know that the 2J block is very, very strong. I don't know how strong the internals are either. We're going to try some stuff with some ring gap and see what happens, and we'll kind of hope for the best. But I think I built one of these with ported heads and the right camshaft, and that's one thing that the 2J has, is there are cams available for them, whereas with these, you would either have to have billet ones done or regrinds, which is always a little iffy. Omar, we run stock exhaust manifolds all the time with turbos. As a matter of fact, my single turbo kit is stock truck manifolds facing front, facing forward on the engine, and then a Y pipe into a turbo, and it works very, very well. The oil light will illuminate at 8 psi. That's waiting until the last minute. ICT car guy, no, a 219, 223, and a 6-liter truck is fine. An inline six makes more torque than a V engine cubic inch for cubic inch. I don't know that I would agree with that. I don't know that the engine designation or the design of the engine has an effect on torque production. I think that that's more going to be displacement, and then the other things that are in the motor, like the cam timing and the head flow and those things, and the intake manifold. Julius, I think that that would be a good that might be a good video for me to do. And so don't tell anybody else. But if we did a comparison of the 4200 and the Barra and the 2JZ, and just looked at stuff like that, like let's look at head flow, let's look at stock cam timing, let's look at strength or potential power, or let's look at the displacement, let's look at the NA power outputs of these things to find out kind of how they compare. CA434 is joining. So Mark, what do you think? The 4200 head flows a lot more than a 2JZ? And yes, there's supposed to be harmonics issues with the 4200, but I don't know how there wouldn't be harmonics issues with all of these inline six cylinders. Yeah, I talked to NIV LAC 57 today, and we talked about the harmonic stuff. It's pretty interesting. I know, Crayon Fish. How does an inline six have harmonics problems? It shouldn't have those. It should be inherently better. Yeah, the 2J does have less stroke. It has less displacement, so the stroke length is definitely an issue. What, Julius, if you're still out there, what displacement is the Barra? Yeah, the Jeep is another one, but that's a 4-liter, so that's pretty good size too. What's the Barra is a 4-liter also? Okay. So what's the head flow like on a Jeep? My Holden roast bouncers at over 8,000 RPM. Oh, and the other one is the 300 Ford, the 5-liter Ford. So it's the biggest of them all, right? Yeah. Does anybody know what the Jeep 4-liter Jeep head flow is? I can't see it being very much. Those are pretty low RPM torque kind of motors. Tim says it's measured in 2 digits. That's not a good sign. AJ says the CFM for Jeeps is a little south of not good. Yeah, it's a push rod motor, so it'll be low RPM. I want to see a Mitsubishi 6G7X content. Oh, fix your automobile. 192 CFM, 138 on the exhaust. Yeah, Cummings is that doesn't have harmonics, not at 4,500 RPM. Pablo, you can run 11 to 1 on 91 octane. Yeah, the Ford 300 is another one that I wanted. It's got intake runner lengths that are like 9 feet long. No, to 192 CFM is kind of good for a factory head. If you look at that's that's close to what the fabulous Fuelie heads from the V8 stuff flowed. Oh, Tom, the adapter's ready. Cool. I was just talking to somebody on oh no, it wasn't a Buick 350. It was an Olds 350. He has a W31 car, which is really cool. The moving the injectors can hurt the idle a little bit. If you move them not that much, it shouldn't affect it greatly. We were still able to get the Honda to idle when I moved the injectors all the way out in front of the IR manifold, so it still works. It's not ideal, but it does improve power quite a bit. Crayon Fish, a 600 CFM on a 4.7 Jeep would maybe not make any more power than the 390 because the 390 is probably not restricting it at the power output that thing's making. But who knows? You got to try it. Julius, I can look it up. I just am curious. It was just an interesting comparison, especially now that we've also added the Ford and the Jeep to the mix. Now, now we have a bunch of them to look at. Mr. Dash, and I've tested all of the Dorman manifolds, or at least it's been a year or more now, but I've tested the truck version, the LS2 version, the LS6 version. I've tested those and know what they do. So those are part of the, I think I've had videos on those. Yeah, Edelbrock does have Jeep stuff. GM made a 292 inline six-cylinder, which I have one of those that we're testing. It's a really old one, though. Oh, the Mitsubishi V6. It was in the Dodge Stealth. The twin turbo Dodge Stealths were really cool. That's what that's what Hennessy started out with. I remember racing him in my supercharged Mustang out at the Silver State. He brought one of those Stealths out, one of the twin turbos deals, and we did like, I don't know, 15 or 20 like rolling high speed starts with my Mustang. And I was actually able to beat him, but the shift from fourth to fifth gear in my Mustang was terrible. So it went from 1 to 1 to, I think, 0.68 is what my trans was. And so it just fell on its face because it's a centrifugal blower, but the turbos don't have that problem. So that he was able to just start like edging up. We never got the run out at the maximum speed on this stretch of road where we were supposed to be following a highway patrol, but it all worked out good. Scuba, yeah, John Hennessy himself raced out there in one of the Dodge Stealths that they were doing. I haven't tested any of the 4-cylinder Ecotech stuff. A horizontally opposed engine. I don't know how we would run that on the engine dyno. Yeah, Thumble, it's not a it's not a balance issue. The crank and the rods and the pistons are all balanced. Yeah, 4-liter Jeep with the Eaton would be good. Julius, are guys starting with the NA motors there and just building up turbo versions? Vincent, I don't know about the tuning. I don't know where you are. Admiral, I'm not going to do a 10,000 RPM motor. That's really, really expensive. Although Westech has some cup motors, and I wonder how high those things are going. Yeah, Scuba, I've been out there. I went out there to the first race, and then that's how I got started in this industry. And then I went to the next 12, and then I stopped after a while, and then we haven't been back for a long time. And Vincent, yeah, I don't know about tuning in this area. Oh, Jag 6-cylinder. I saw some Jaguars in the junkyard that I was at. Okay, Julius, makes sense. Buy a turbo or an LPG motor. Fix your automobile. You have the last question of the night because I have to get going. Very curious what the difference is in knock threshold. What the difference in knock threshold is under boost in an LT1 versus an LS1. Would this be a good indicator of head cylinder design improvement? The knock threshold isn't going to be the only indicator of design improvement, because obviously there are other things that are going on with that. Flow would be a big thing, and that might have nothing to do with the detonation threshold. There are other things that are going to determine that detonation threshold: the piston design, the chamber design, the temperature, the cooling of the head. There are a lot of things going on there that might not have anything to do with saying that one head is better than the other. Really, if you look at the flow rates of those two heads, you can see that one flows more than the other one does. And so from a performance standpoint, that's obviously very desirable just from that. The LT4 head flows very well. And so that's not that they didn't know how to make a good flowing head. When they went to the LS1, that was the next evolution of that small block, and it's better than the previous stuff. I have to get going, guys. I will see you all tomorrow. Thanks for showing up. I'm going to post this other video up, so you guys make sure you go take a look at it when it's up and tell all of your friends. I'll see you guys tomorrow.